Let me ask you something that could completely change the way you see this situation. What if their silence isn't the end of the story? What if the person who seems completely unaffected by your absence is actually going through a battle you cannot see? What if they've convinced themselves that they don't need you, that they're better off alone, that walking away was the right decision, until one day they look around and realize something terrifying? You are no longer waiting. You are no longer checking your phone. You are no longer trying to explain your worth. You are no longer standing at the door of their life, begging them to recognize what they had. And suddenly, your absence isn't temporary anymore. It feels permanent. That is when something changes. But listen carefully. This is not about manipulating someone into fearing losing you. This is about understanding the incredible power of reclaiming yourself. Tony Robbins teaches that where your focus goes, your energy flows. And if all of your energy has been focused on someone else's silence, someone else's decision, someone else's emotions, then you've slowly handed them the steering wheel of your life. Take it back. Because sometimes God allows someone to walk away, not to destroy you, but to redirect you. Sometimes the unanswered message is the answer. Sometimes the closed door is protection. Sometimes the person you desperately want to return is not the person you need to chase. And sometimes the greatest miracle isn't that they finally come back. It's that you finally come back to yourself. Today, we're going to uncover what happens when an avoidant stays silent for too long. Why your absence can suddenly become impossible for them to ignore. And most importantly, why your transformation must never depend on whether they return. Because when you stop chasing someone and start chasing your purpose, something extraordinary happens. You become free. And when you become free, you become powerful. So don't listen to this message hoping to discover how to make someone afraid of losing you. Listen because you're about to discover how to become the kind of person who no longer fears being lost by anyone. Silence doesn't always mean they've stopped caring. There is a mistake people make when someone suddenly becomes distant. They assume silence means indifference. They assume that because the avoidant stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped explaining, or stopped showing emotion, the feelings must have disappeared. But human beings are far more complicated than that. Sometimes silence is not the absence of emotion. Sometimes silence is what a person creates when they do not know how to handle emotion. Tony Robbins often teaches that human behavior is driven by the meanings people attach to their experiences and by the needs they are trying to protect. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, closeness can create an internal conflict. They may desire connection while simultaneously fearing what connection requires from them. They want to feel loved, but they may fear dependence. They may want intimacy, but vulnerability can make them feel exposed. They may care deeply, but when emotions become intense, their instinct may be to create distance. That is why you cannot always interpret silence literally. A person can miss you and still remain silent. A person can think about you and still refuse to reach out. A person can replay memories in their mind and still tell themselves that leaving was the right decision. Why? Because sometimes the mind builds walls around feelings the heart has not resolved. Think about what happens when someone feels emotionally overwhelmed. One person moves closer. Another person moves away. One person wants answers immediately. The other needs space. One person says, "Tell me what you're feeling." The other says, "I don't know." And that "I don't know" can become months of silence. But here is where you must become wise. Do not romanticize silence. Do not automatically assume that every silent person secretly loves you. Do not create a fantasy where every absence means hidden devotion. Instead, understand this. Silence is information, but it is not always a complete explanation. Their silence may tell you that they are overwhelmed. It may tell you that they are emotionally unavailable. It may tell you that they are afraid of intimacy. It may tell you that they do not have the emotional skills to communicate what is happening inside them. But whatever the reason, you must stop making their silence a measurement of your worth. This is where the transformation begins. Because when someone withdraws, your wounded mind may immediately ask, "What is wrong with me?" That is the wrong question. Ask instead, what is happening inside them and what is happening inside me? You cannot control the first question's answer, but you can transform the second. You can choose not to abandon yourself simply because someone else created distance. You can choose not to chase. You can choose not to send 10 messages trying to force clarity from someone who is unwilling to communicate. You can choose not to spend every night analyzing their social media, their last message, their tone, or how many hours they took to respond. You can choose peace. And this is where divine wisdom enters. Sometimes God allows silence because silence exposes what noise was hiding. When someone is constantly present, you can become distracted by their attention. But when they disappear, you are forced to confront yourself. You discover where you were dependent. You discover where you were seeking validation. You discover how much of your emotional stability was resting on another person's behavior. That discovery can hurt, but it can also liberate you. Maybe the lesson isn't, how do I get them to speak? Maybe the lesson is, why did I stop listening to myself? Maybe the lesson isn't, how do I make them miss me? Maybe the lesson is, why did I forget how valuable my life is when they walked away? That is the moment you begin to change. Because your power does not come from making an avoidant person chase you. Your power comes from becoming emotionally secure within yourself. And sometimes, when you stop chasing, the other person finally has space to experience your absence without your constant effort filling the gap. They may begin remembering your presence. They may recognize the peace, loyalty, support, laughter, and emotional safety you brought into their world. But remember this, their realization is their responsibility. Your transformation is yours. Never confuse someone's potential awakening with your purpose. Your purpose is bigger than whether one person calls you back. You were not created merely to be chosen by someone else. You were created to grow, to serve, to love, to build, to lead, and to become the person God designed you to be. So when an avoidant becomes silent, don't immediately collapse into fear. Pause, breathe, step back, and remind yourself, their silence does not define my value. Their distance does not erase my impact. Their inability to communicate does not determine my future. Let them have their silence, and you use yours to become stronger, because sometimes the most powerful response to someone's withdrawal is not another message. It is a transformed life, a peaceful mind, a stronger heart, a clearer purpose, and a person who finally understands that love should never require the destruction of your own identity. They don't fear losing you until your absence becomes real. There is a powerful truth about human nature that many people discover only after experiencing heartbreak. People often recognize the value of something more clearly when they realize they can no longer take it for granted. And this is especially important when dealing with someone who has strong avoidant tendencies. As long as you remain emotionally available, constantly reaching out, checking in, explaining yourself, offering reassurance, and keeping the door wide open, the other person may never fully experience what life feels like without you. They may assume you will always be there, not necessarily because they don't care. Sometimes because your availability has become familiar, your presence becomes predictable, your attention becomes expected. Your forgiveness becomes assumed, and when something becomes predictable, people can stop recognizing its value, but then something changes. You stop chasing. You stop asking for explanations. You stop trying to convince them that the connection mattered. You stop reminding them of everything you gave. You stop standing outside an emotional door that they refuse to open. And suddenly, your absence becomes real. That is a completely different experience, because before they could tell themselves they'll come back, they still care, they're probably waiting. I can reach out whenever I want. But when you genuinely begin moving forward, those assumptions begin to disappear. And now their mind has to confront a possibility it previously avoided. What if I actually lost them? That question can create an emotional reaction, not because you manipulated them, not because you played games, not because you intentionally tried to trigger jealousy, but because reality finally became louder than their assumptions. Tony Robbins teaches that human beings are often motivated by the desire to move toward pleasure and away from pain. When someone believes they still have access to something valuable, urgency can remain low. But when that possibility begins disappearing, the emotional significance can become much stronger. Think about it. When you know something is always available, you may postpone appreciating it. But when you realize it may never be available again, suddenly every memory becomes sharper. The conversations feel different. The laughter feels different. The small moments you once ignored suddenly seem meaningful. The person who seemed ordinary in your daily life can suddenly become extraordinary in your memory. That is why your absence can sometimes awaken reflection. But understand this carefully. Your goal should never be to manufacture that fear. Do not disappear simply to punish someone. Do not create artificial jealousy. Do not post a fake perfect life just to make them wonder who you're with. Do not manipulate their emotions, because manipulation is not transformation. Real power comes from authenticity. You step back because you respect yourself. You stop chasing because you understand that love cannot be forced. You stop begging because you recognize that your dignity has value. You stop waiting because your life is moving. And when your life moves, your energy changes. You become less desperate for an answer. You become less dependent on their attention. You begin sleeping better. You begin focusing again. You start investing in your health, your work, your family, your faith, your goals, your purpose. And eventually something extraordinary happens. You stop asking, when will they come back? You start asking, where am I going next? That question can change everything, because when you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your life. And perhaps somewhere along the way, that person notices the difference. They notice you are no longer pursuing them. They notice you are no longer emotionally reacting to every little thing. They notice that your energy feels different. They may wonder why you seem more peaceful. They may begin to realize that the person they once assumed would always be available is building a life that no longer revolves around them. That can create fear. But remember, fear of losing you is not the same as readiness to love you properly. This distinction is critical. Someone can fear losing you and still be emotionally unavailable. Someone can miss you and still struggle with intimacy. Someone can regret losing you and still not possess the maturity necessary to build a healthy relationship. So never measure transformation by whether someone finally reaches out. Measure transformation by who you become while they are gone. That is the divine lesson. Sometimes God allows distance because distance reveals attachment. Sometimes God allows absence because absence teaches gratitude. Sometimes God allows someone to walk away because you are beginning to make their presence more important than your purpose. And sometimes the miracle is not that they become afraid of losing you. The miracle is that you become unafraid of losing them. Think about that. When you no longer fear losing someone, you become free to love without begging. You become free to give without demanding. You become free to walk away when something does not honor your worth. And paradoxically, that freedom may be the very thing that changes how the other person sees you, because confidence is attractive, purpose is attractive. Emotional stability is attractive. Self-respect is powerful. A person who knows their worth does not need to announce it every 5 minutes. They live it, so let your absence become real. Not as punishment, but as truth. Let them experience the space created by your decision to stop chasing. And while they experience that space, you build, you grow, you heal, you pray, you become disciplined, you become stronger, you become more focused, you become more alive. Because your life was never supposed to stop while someone else decided whether they were ready to value you. Your life is happening now. And perhaps one day they will look back and realize what they lost. Perhaps they will reach out. Perhaps they will not. But by then, you should have reached a place where your peace does not depend on either outcome. Because the greatest sign that you have truly grown is not that they finally fear losing you. It is that you finally understand that losing yourself was never an option. Your detachment changes the entire emotional dynamic. There comes a moment in every difficult relationship when you have to ask yourself a powerful question. Am I loving this person, or am I losing myself trying to keep them? That question can change your life. Because when someone becomes distant, the natural reaction is often to move closer. You want answers, you want reassurance, you want to know what changed. So you send another message, you explain yourself again. You remind them how much you care. You try to prove that the relationship is worth saving. But here is the paradox. The more desperately you try to control another person's emotional response, the more powerless you become. And this is where detachment enters. Detachment does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean pretending you never cared. It does not mean becoming cruel, playing games, or trying to punish someone with silence. Detachment means releasing your need to control the outcome. Tony Robbins has repeatedly emphasized the importance of taking responsibility for what you can control rather than allowing external circumstances to determine your emotional state. You cannot control someone's feelings. You cannot control when they become vulnerable. You cannot control whether they reach out, but you can control your response, and that is where your power lives. Imagine what happens when you stop chasing an avoidant person. The emotional pressure begins to disappear. They are no longer constantly receiving messages asking, "Why are you doing this?" They are no longer being asked to explain emotions they may not understand themselves. They are no longer being pursued into a conversation they aren't ready to have. And you are no longer living in a state of emotional reaction. Something shifts. You become quieter. But your quietness is different now. It isn't the silence of desperation. It is the silence of self-respect. You stop saying, "Please choose me," and you begin saying, "I choose myself." That is a profound transformation. Because when your energy is constantly directed toward another person, your life begins shrinking around their behavior. Their response determines your mood. Their message determines your happiness. Their silence determines your confidence. You wake up checking your phone. You go to sleep wondering what they are thinking. You analyze every conversation. You search for hidden meanings. You become obsessed with timing, social media activity, and tiny changes in their behavior. But when you detach, you take your attention back. You stop trying to decode them and start developing yourself. You stop asking, "What are they feeling?" and start asking, "What am I becoming?" That is the question of a powerful person, because your attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Whatever receives your attention receives your energy. And whatever receives your energy can eventually shape your life. So why give enormous amounts of energy to someone who is giving you uncertainty? Take that energy and redirect it, put it into your health, put it into your career, put it into your family, put it into your faith, put it into your creativity, put it into the goals you abandoned while trying to get someone's attention. And something begins happening inside you. You become stronger, not because they changed, because you changed. You become less reactive, you become more emotionally grounded. You begin realizing that peace is not something another person gives you. Peace is something you cultivate. And this is where divine principles become powerful. Sometimes God removes your ability to control a situation because he wants you to develop trust. You may pray, "God, make them come back." But perhaps the greater prayer is, "God, make me strong enough to accept your will." That is surrender. And surrender is not weakness. Surrender is recognizing that you are not God. You cannot control another person's heart. You can only control your own choices, boundaries, character, and direction. Maybe that person returns. Maybe they don't. But if your entire healing process requires them to return, then you are still giving them control. Real healing happens when you can say, "I love you, but I do not need your response to know who I am." That sentence contains freedom. And when an avoidant person sees that freedom, the emotional dynamic can change. Before, they may have felt that you were always available. Now, they see someone who has boundaries. Before, they may have felt pressure. Now, they see space. Before, they may have believed your life revolved around them. Now, they see that your life has direction. That can cause reflection. They may become curious. They may wonder what changed. They may realize that your attention was not something they could take for granted forever. But again, your purpose is not to create that reaction. Your purpose is to become whole. Because the moment your detachment becomes a strategy to make someone chase you, it is not true detachment. It is manipulation wearing the mask of self-respect. Real detachment says, I am moving forward whether you come with me or not. That is powerful. That is maturity. That is emotional freedom. And perhaps this is the lesson you were meant to learn all along. You do not need to chase what is aligned with you. You do not need to beg someone to recognize your value. You do not need to convince someone to communicate. You do not need to sacrifice your dignity to keep a connection alive. Love should invite you to become more of yourself, not less. So release the grip, stop forcing, stop pursuing, stop trying to control what another person feels. Stand still long enough to hear your own heart again, then move forward. Because when you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your energy. When you reclaim your energy, you reclaim your identity. And when you reclaim your identity, you become dangerous to the old version of yourself. The version that believed someone else's silence could determine your worth. Let them have their choice. Let them have their journey. Let them experience your absence. And you experience your awakening, because your greatest victory is not making an avoidant person afraid of losing you. Your greatest victory is becoming so deeply connected to your purpose that you no longer abandon yourself just to keep someone else close. They may feel your value most clearly when you stop proving it. There is a powerful truth that many people discover too late. The more you try to prove your worth to someone, the more you may teach them to overlook it. Think about that. You explain how much you care. You remind them of everything you have done. You tell them how loyal you have been. You try to show them that nobody will love them the way you do. You send the long message. You give the second chance, then the third. You continue showing up even when they barely meet you halfway. And somewhere inside, you hope that eventually they will understand your value. But what if your value was never something you needed to prove? What if the problem wasn't that you hadn't shown them enough? What if you had simply been showing too much to someone who was not ready to receive it? This is where emotional maturity begins. Tony Robbins teaches that your standards, decisions, and focus shape the quality of your life. When you constantly seek validation from another person, you place your emotional state in their hands. You begin measuring yourself by their attention instead of by your own values. And that is exhausting. You start thinking, what else can I do? Maybe I should text more. Maybe I should become more understanding. Maybe I should be more patient. Maybe I should give them even more space. Maybe I should show them I am different. But eventually you realize something profound. You cannot love someone into emotional readiness. You cannot perform your way into being valued. You cannot become perfect enough to remove another person's fear of intimacy, and you cannot keep giving endlessly without eventually losing something precious, your own center. This is why your absence can become meaningful. When you stop trying to prove your value, you give the other person an opportunity to experience reality. They can no longer measure your love by how often you chase them. They have to remember it for themselves. They begin noticing the things they previously took for granted. The way you listened, the way you encouraged them, the way you believed in them, the way you made ordinary moments feel special, the way you were there when life became difficult. Sometimes people don't recognize the warmth of a room until they walk into the cold. And this isn't always about romance, it is human nature. Familiar blessings can become invisible. A person can become accustomed to your kindness. They can become accustomed to your patience. They can become accustomed to your availability. But when those things disappear, the contrast becomes obvious. Suddenly, they notice the silence where your conversations used to be. They notice the empty space where your presence once existed. They notice that nobody is checking in the way you did. And memories begin rising. Not because you demanded that they remember, because absence creates space for reflection. But understand this carefully. You are not stepping back to create a psychological reaction. You are stepping back because you have decided that your life deserves balance. That distinction changes everything. If you withdraw because you want them to panic, you are still emotionally attached to their reaction. But if you step back because you respect yourself, you are free. That is real power. And there is something deeply spiritual about this principle. Sometimes God asks you to stop proving yourself because he wants you to understand that your identity was never supposed to come from another person's approval. Your worth existed before they noticed it. Your purpose existed before they met you. Your gifts existed before they loved you. And your future does not depend on whether they recognize any of those things. Think about how freeing that is. You don't have to convince anyone that you are valuable. You simply have to live according to your values. Become the person you respect. Keep your promises to yourself. Develop discipline. Strengthen your character. Take care of your body. Protect your peace. Build your future. The others, walk with God and let your life become the evidence. Because real confidence does not say, look how valuable I am. Real confidence says, I know who I am and I don't need to convince you. That energy is different. It is calm, it is grounded, it is attractive because it is not desperate. An avoidant person may become more aware of your value when you stop making yourself constantly available. But don't make that your reason for changing. Change because your soul is asking for more. Change because you have dreams. Change because your life matters. Change because there are things you were called to build that have nothing to do with whether one person stays. And here is another truth you must remember. Someone recognizing your value does not automatically mean they know how to honor it. They might miss you. They might regret losing you. They might even reach out. But recognition is only the beginning. Healthy connection requires consistency. It requires emotional responsibility. It requires communication. It requires willingness. It requires action. So never become so excited by someone's realization that you ignore their behavior. Words can awaken hope. Walks reveal character. If they return, let their consistency speak. Let their responsibility speak. Let their willingness to communicate speak. You do not need to interrogate them. You do not need to demand that they prove everything immediately. Simply observe. Because when you stop proving your worth, you also stop negotiating against yourself. You stop saying, I'll accept anything as long as you stay. And you start saying, I am open to love, but I will not abandon myself for it. That is the standard. That is the transformation. And perhaps the most beautiful thing that happens is this. One day, you realize that you no longer care whether they finally understand your value because you understand it. You no longer need them to validate your heart. You no longer need their message to validate your mourning. You no longer need their return to validate your future. You know what you bring. You know what you deserve. You know what you will no longer tolerate. And you know that God did not place you on this earth to spend your entire life begging someone else to recognize what he already placed inside you. So stop proving, start becoming, stop chasing recognition, start living with purpose. Stop asking, how can I make them see my value? Ask instead, how can I live today in a way that honors the value God already gave me? Because when you live from that place, something changes. You don't need to convince people anymore. You don't need to chase them anymore. You don't need to perform anymore. You become the evidence. And sometimes when people finally see the person you became after you stopped chasing them, they understand what they lost. But by then, your greatest discovery will not be that they finally saw your value. It will be that you never needed their permission to have it. Divine timing often requires you to release control. There is a point in life when you have to stop asking, how do I make this happen? And start asking, what is God trying to teach me through what is happening? That shift can change everything. When someone you deeply care about becomes distant, your mind immediately wants control. You want to know when they will return. You want to know whether they miss you. You want to know whether they are thinking about you. You want to know what message will finally break through their emotional wall. You begin trying to manage the outcome. You analyze every detail. You replay every conversation. You search for signs. You wonder whether silence means they are coming back or moving on. But the more you try to control what another person feels, the more anxious you become. And this is where faith asks you to do something difficult. Let go. Tony Robbins often teaches the importance of controlling what you can control while refusing to surrender your emotional power to circumstances you cannot command. You cannot control another person's timing. You cannot control their emotional readiness. You cannot force their heart to open. You can only control your own decisions, your standards, your actions, your mindset, your response, and your relationship with God. Sometimes the hardest prayer is not, God, bring them back. Sometimes the hardest prayer is, God, if this relationship is meant for me, prepare both of us. And if it is not, give me the strength to release it. That prayer requires courage because it means surrendering the outcome. You are saying, I trust you more than I trust my fear. That is faith. And divine timing is often uncomfortable because we want immediate answers. We live in a world that teaches instant results. Assess the message, get the reply, post something, watch the reaction, make a decision, see the outcome. But God does not operate according to our impatience. Sometimes the waiting period is where the deepest transformation takes place. Consider what happens when you are forced to wait. You become more reflective. You become more patient. You discover your attachments. You confront your insecurities. You learn whether you genuinely trust God or only trust Him when life goes according to your plan. And perhaps that is why this season exists. Not because you are being punished, but because you are being prepared. Maybe God is working on your heart while you are waiting for someone else's heart to change. Maybe the delay is protecting you from accepting something before you are ready. Maybe the distance is teaching you how to stand alone. Maybe the unanswered questions are forcing you to develop a stronger identity. You may be praying for someone to return while God is preparing you to become someone who no longer needs to be rescued by their return. That is a profound difference. Because sometimes what you think is a delay is actually development. What you think is rejection is redirection. What you think is an ending is preparation for a new beginning. And this does not mean every painful situation has a hidden romantic purpose. Sometimes the lesson is simply that you deserve healthier communication. Sometimes the lesson is that love cannot survive without mutual effort. Sometimes the lesson is that you are holding on to a possibility rather than accepting reality. Faith does not require you to deny reality. Faith allows you to face reality without believing that reality is the end of your story. So release control. Stop trying to predict every move. Stop trying to force emotional breakthroughs. Stop searching for secret formulas that will make someone suddenly become ready. Instead, ask, what is my next right step? That is a powerful question. Not, what are they doing? Not, when will they return? Not, how can I make them miss me? But what does integrity require from me today? Maybe your next step is healing. Maybe it is establishing boundaries. Maybe it is apologizing for something you genuinely did wrong. Maybe it is accepting that the relationship has ended. Maybe it is simply getting out of bed and rebuilding your daily routine. Whatever the step is, take it, because purpose is revealed through movement, and while you move, trust God with what you cannot carry. You don't need to know the entire road. You need enough faith to take the next step. Think about a person walking through darkness with a small light. They cannot see the entire path, but they can see the next few feet. That is often how divine timing works. You are not given the entire blueprint. You are given enough light to keep moving. So perhaps you don't know whether this person will return. You don't know what they are thinking. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. But you do know this. You can choose peace today. You can choose discipline today. You can choose dignity today. You can choose faith today. You can choose growth today. And every time you make one of those choices, you become stronger. If they return one day, let them meet a stronger version of you. And if they don't, let the stronger version of you continue forward anyway. That is the power of surrender. You are not giving up on love. You are giving up on control. You are not giving up on hope. You are giving up on obsession. You are not saying, I don't care. You are saying, I care, but I trust God enough not to destroy myself trying to control the outcome. There is freedom in that. Because when you surrender the outcome, you finally have the energy to build the life you were meant to live. You start becoming grateful again. You start noticing opportunities. You start reconnecting with your purpose. You begin looking forward instead of constantly looking backward. And perhaps one day you will understand why the timing had to be exactly this way. Perhaps they return with greater maturity. Perhaps you discover that you are better without them. Perhaps another relationship enters your life. Perhaps your career takes off. Perhaps your faith deepens. Perhaps you become the person you were always supposed to become. You cannot see it yet, but you don't need to. Trust is built in the space between what you can see and what you believe. So release the need to know everything. Release the need to control everyone. Release the need to force the timing. Plead what you cannot control into God's hands and place what you can control into action. Then keep walking, because sometimes the greatest miracle is not receiving exactly what you prayed for. Sometimes the miracle is becoming the person who can handle whatever answer comes. And when you reach that place, you stop living in fear of losing someone. You start living in faith that what is truly aligned with your purpose will not require you to destroy your peace to keep it. The ultimate victory is becoming someone who no longer needs their return. There is a level of emotional freedom that most people never reach because they are still measuring their healing by someone else's behavior. They say, I'll be okay when they come back. I'll feel valuable when they realize what they lost. I'll finally have peace when they apologize. I'll move forward when they choose me again. But what if your peace could begin before any of that happens? What if the real victory is not making an avoidant person return? What if the real victory is becoming so grounded in yourself that their return is no longer required for you to feel complete? That is transformation. Tony Robbins teaches that the quality of your life is deeply connected to the meaning you give your experiences and the decisions you make in response to them. You cannot always choose what happens to you, but you can choose who you become because of it. And this is where heartbreak can become a turning point. You can allow rejection to convince you that you are not enough, or you can allow it to teach you that your worth cannot be negotiated. You can allow someone's silence to make you obsessive, or you can use that silence to discover your own voice again. You can spend months asking, why don't they want me? Or you can finally ask the bigger question, why did I make their decision the foundation of my identity? That question is uncomfortable, but it can set you free. Because no relationship should have the power to erase you. No breakup should make you forget your purpose. No person's inability to communicate should become a lifelong judgment against your worth. And no one's return should be the condition you place on your happiness. You are more than someone else's romantic choice. You are a person with a future. You have talents. You have responsibilities. You have dreams. You have people who love you. You have gifts that still need to be used. You have a life that is happening right now. So stop putting your life on pause. Stop treating your future like it is waiting for a text message. Stop postponing your happiness until someone else decides they are ready. Get up, moth, be, build, create, pray, fee, grow, become. Because the moment you start building a meaningful life again, something changes inside you. You begin to discover that happiness was never supposed to be something another person carries into your life. Happiness can come from purpose, from contribution, from gratitude, from faith, from discipline, from meaningful relationships, from becoming proud of the person you see in the mirror. This is why true detachment is not, I don't care about you. It is, I care about you, but I also care about me. That sentence contains maturity. You can love someone and still let them go. You can miss someone and still move forward. You can hope for reconciliation without making reconciliation your religion. You can wish someone well while building a life they may never be part of. That is emotional strength. And perhaps one of the greatest tests of your growth comes when the person finally returns. Because imagine this. After months of silence, the phone rings, a message appears. They say they have been thinking about you. They say they miss you. They want to talk. The old version of you might immediately surrender everything. You might think, this is it, everything is finally fixed. But the new version of you pauses, you listen, you observe. You don't operate from desperation anymore. You ask yourself, does this person now have the capacity to build what I actually need? That's a completely different question, because missing you is not the same as being ready for you. Regretting losing you is not the same as knowing how to love you. Fear of losing you is not the same as commitment. Words can open the door. Only consistent action can build the house. So if someone returns, don't abandon the growth you achieved while they were gone. Do not trade your new peace for the old patterns. Do not let one emotional conversation erase months of lessons. Let their actions reveal who they are now. And if they do not return, you keep going. That is where your deepest victory lives. You keep going. You wake up tomorrow. You continue your mission. You keep strengthening your faith. You continue building your career. You continue taking care of your body. You continue loving your family. You continue serving people. You continue becoming better. You become proof that their absence did not destroy you. In fact, it developed you. Sometimes God uses the departure of one person to introduce you to a stronger version of yourself. You thought you were losing a relationship, but perhaps you were gaining boundaries. You thought you were losing love, but perhaps you were gaining self-respect. You thought you were being abandoned, but perhaps you were being redirected toward your purpose. And I want you to understand something powerful. You do not need someone to regret losing you in order for your life to have meaning. You do not need someone to come crawling back. You do not need them to finally understand. You do not need the apology. You do not need the explanation. You do not even need closure from another person. Sometimes closure is the decision you make inside yourself. I will not spend another year waiting for something I cannot control. That is closure. That is courage. That is freedom. So become someone who no longer needs their return, not because your heart became cold, because your heart became strong, not because you stopped believing in love. Because you started believing in yourself, not because you stopped caring, because you stopped abandoning yourself in the name of caring. And this is where your life expands. You stop asking, how do I get them back? You ask, how do I become unforgettable to myself? You stop asking, do they miss me? You ask, am I living a life I am proud of? You stop asking, when will they choose me? You ask, am I choosing myself every day? Those questions build a different person, a stronger person, a calmer person, a wiser person, a person who understands that love is beautiful, but purpose is essential. And perhaps one day, the avoidant person who walked away will realize exactly what they lost. Perhaps they will miss your presence. Perhaps they will regret their silence. Perhaps they will return. But by then, your greatest accomplishment will be this. You will no longer need their return to know that you won. You won when you stopped begging. You won when you stopped chasing. You won when you stopped sacrificing your identity. You won when you chose peace over obsession. You won when you chose purpose over waiting. You won when you trusted God with the outcome. And most importantly, you won when you learned that losing someone else is painful, but losing yourself is far more costly. So stand up, lift your head, take back your attention, take back your energy, take back your future. Let the past be the teacher, not the prison. And walk forward with faith, because your next chapter should not begin when someone else returns. Your next chapter begins when you decide that you are finally ready to return to yourself.